Hello everyone, welcome to the third episode of Terrius Talks Tech. On this episode I wanted to look at some of the Ryzen and Intel benchmarks. Over the past few months here I've been watching the Ryzen benchmarking and the reviews very closely. So one of the things I wanted to do was gather up as much data as I could from the reviews, all the different benchmarks, and take that data and aggregate it and then average it out and see kind of what the average performance of the Ryzen processors are compared to the Intel processors. The big reason I want to do this is because there's very few benchmarkers that use the same settings in all of the games. So the synthetic benchmarks were fairly easy to aggregate the data for because they're synthetic and they don't have much variability to how they're run. So Cinebench and Firestrike, those had pretty reliable results from different sites. For Firestrike, it was difficult to tell if they were reporting the whole system score or if they were just reporting the physics score. It seemed like one or two of them were doing the whole system score, whereas the rest of them were doing the just physics score. The more difficult part was finding some gaming data that I could aggregate, so it was fairly difficult to find games that everybody liked to use. The four different games that came up the most often were Deus Ex Mankind Divided, Rise of the Tomb Raider, GTA 5, and Battlefield 1. Now, unfortunately, I was hoping for like 10 data points for each of these games. For most of them, there was only between 3 and 5, so it wasn't as big of a data pool as I would have liked. The thing I like about aggregating the benchmarks and setting them up that way is that you get more of an average view of how the platform is performing on a whole. So hopefully somebody else out there will find these aggregated scores interesting. So let's take a look. So first up we have the Cinebench scores. As you can see, the single-threaded performance of all the 7000 series Intel CPUs is much higher than Ryzen. However, the old 6900K is roughly the same, so that's these numbers here, the blue. For multi-threading, the 7900X manages quite a big jump over the 1800X. 7900X, of course, is a 10-core, 20-thread CPU, whereas the 1800X is an 8-core 16-thread CPU. Other than that, the i5 performs the worst in the Cinebench tests, and that's because it's only a 4-core CPU. It has hyperthreading disabled, so it can't execute 2 threads per clock cycle, which is what all of the other processors in this list can do. The 7700K is a 4-core 8-thread CPU. Ryzen starts off at the 6-core mark here with the R5 1600X, so it's 6 cores with 12 threads. Then we have the 6900K, which is an 8-core 16-thread CPU, and then the Ryzen 7s, which are both 8-core 16-thread CPUs. Secondly, here we have Firestrike. So in this, the Intel 7900X beats out the Ryzen 1800X by about 28%, which is actually a very respectable difference. The 6900K only beats out the 1800X there by roughly 7%, and the 7700K and 7600K both fell behind Ryzen, all of the Ryzen chips. The odd thing here was that we had the 1600X from AMD outperform the 1700X. Now, I don't know if this is because the 1600X has the same clock speed as the 1800X, whereas the 17 is a bit slower, or if it was simply because these were older benchmarks of the 17 and 1800Xs, in which case it would be very interesting to see how they perform currently after all of the microcode updates and BIOS updates that have happened to the Ryzen platform lately. Third up here we have Deus Ex Mankind Divided. So in here, the Intel 7900X, the 7700K, and the 6900K all perform nearly identically. They're within 1% of each other, so they're basically identical. And they beat out all of the Ryzen chips there. They're beating out the 1800X and the 1600X by about 12 to 13%. So the Intel 7600K falls behind all but the Ryzen 1700X. And this is another case of, I wonder if the microcode updates and the BIOS updates would benefit the 1700X at all here, or if it's just getting beaten that much because of its lower clock speeds. Fourth, we have Tomb Raider. So all of the Intel CPUs take the top positions in this. The 7000 series beat out the old 6900K by a good margin. The 7900X beats out the 1800X here by 35%. So this is what I expected to see on all of the gaming benchmarks, but didn't see it on Deus Ex, so that was interesting. The other two 7000 series chips beat out the 1800X by 28%, and even the 6900K beats it by 21%. Since these AMD benchmarks happened, there has been an update to Rise of the Tomb Raider, and that update was supposed to help it with Ryzen as well as multi-threaded CPUs. So the 7900X benchmarks have all taken place on the updated version of Tomb Raider that had that patch go through. So I don't know if that big variant there between those has anything to do with that patch. Again, it'd be very interesting to see the Ryzen chips retested just to see how they perform now. Fifth, we have Grand Theft Auto 5. Intel once again holds the top 3 positions, however the 7600K falls once again behind the Ryzen chips, only beating out the 1600X from AMD. Now this is surprising to me. I would have expected the 1600X to beat it out as well, just because the 1600X is the 6-core 12-thread chip, but it is interesting to see that the 1800X and the 1700X are beating it out. The 1800X sits about 15 to 19% behind the Intel chips in Grand Theft Auto 5. Sixth, and finally here we have Battlefield 1. And again, this is another clean sweep for Intel. You can see that it basically takes all of the top positions. Ryzen doesn't have much variant at all here, which is actually very odd to see. You would think more CPU cores might help it, but it looks like Battlefield 1 is using the same amount of CPU cores and threads no matter how many the processor has to throw at it. If I had to guess, I'd probably say it's optimized for 4-core processors, and that's why you don't get any benefit from the 6-core or the 8-core AMD chips. The extra single-threaded performance to the Intel chips, the 7000 series, it's roughly 7 to 16% difference between the 1800X and the Intel chips. As an AMD fan, I have to admit that the Intel chips perform exceedingly well in gaming applications. For anyone looking solely to game on their system, the Intel chips are definitely the best bet. Now on the other hand, for content creators, prior to the Ryzen chips, basically all you had to choose from were the Intel prosumer chips like the 6900K or now the new 7900X. Ryzen on the other hand, for rendering, streaming, animation, or heavily threaded tasks is actually performing very well, and at half the price of the Intel competition. Ryzen as a platform is still in its infancy, and though it has improved drastically over the last few months, there are definitely still some growing pains that are going to continue until software is optimized for the new processors. Now that's not an oddity that is just directly related to AMD. The new X299 platform from Intel and the i9 chips are having issues as well, and they too are going to need software optimizations to utilize them properly. So the next thing that will be interesting to see are the Ryzen R3 benchmarks. Those are going to be aimed more at the budget-conscious consumer. They are the 4-core AMD Ryzen chips with no SMT enabled. And then the other big thing is Threadripper, which is theoretically going to be launching sometime in August. That should be a very interesting launch because it is being pinned directly against the Intel prosumer lineup of the i9 chips and the X299 platform. But just like the R7s and R5s, AMD is planning on undercutting Intel quite largely on the pricing for their Threadripper chips versus the i9 chip. Needless to say, the CPU market hasn't been this interesting or exciting in the last 8 years, so this is some very welcome change. For me personally, I'm just glad there are options in the CPU market again. Intel seems to have AMD biting at their heels, and this can only be a good thing regardless of whether or not you're an AMD fan or an Intel fan. After all, competition drives innovation, and Intel has been quite stagnant on the innovation side of things for the last 8-ish years, without anyone there to call their check and kind of push them along. I hope you found this episode of Terrius Talks Tech interesting. I'm hoping these Terrius Talks Tech videos will be a more regular occurrence. I'm hoping either every Tuesday or every other Tuesday for their release. If you did enjoy this episode, then make sure you like and share this video, and if you haven't already, then subscribe to my channel. If you have any questions or comments or even ideas for future Terrius Talks Tech episodes, then please leave them in the comment section below. Otherwise, you can email them to me or tweet them to me. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day.